All right, Representative Talarico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to argue about the fiscal note, but I want to go back to a question that we were wrestling with earlier, which is the opportunity costs of investing in one thing versus not investing in another thing. And I don't want to argue whether this $7 billion was supposed to go to public ed or was supposed to go to water. My point is, this voucher bill, even the most conservative estimates are that it will cost $1 billion in the first year and $7 billion in the next biennium. And it's all coming out of general revenue.
Yes.
And so could this money that's coming out of general revenue go to our public schools?
The answer to that is absolutely true. And I think one other thing to point out with respect to the lost opportunity cost is all of these are based on, first, well, the $1 billion cost for this biennium is based on the assumption that it is limited to the amounts of money that are within the appropriations bill. But I think Representative Bryant pointed out earlier that there was language in last session's bill that is not in this that would have prevented Budget Execution Authority from channeling additional money into the program after the legislature goes home. And given the stated intention of the governor, and for that matter of the lieutenant governor, that they want to give a voucher to every single student, you know that you've got, if you add together the budget board estimates of the number of kids who are in private education currently, it comes up to 910,000 students. So if you give them a $10,330 voucher or higher, because some of them would be special education students and so on, you give them that higher average level of voucher, you're looking at somewhere between $9.5 and $10 billion a year if the governor got his way after the legislature went home and Budget Execution Authority channeled additional money into the program.
Okay. I don't want to get into all the fiscal note, but I just want, because we've had some really wonderful private school families coming and testifying and saying how this would help with their tuition at the private school, and that's great that they've come to testify. I'm trying to figure out how we could use the money in another way, just so we know what our options are. And so I know you're very good at math. I've done some initial math. We heard last week that Texas teachers are making less than they did 10 years ago when you adjust for inflation. My back of the napkin math is that with $1 billion, we could give every Texas teacher about a $3,000 pay raise. Does that sound about right?
I haven't given a thought to it. But that sounds about right, given what I understand to be the current number of teachers, something in that range.
And I think with $7 billion, we could give every Texas teacher an $11,000 pay raise.
We also could finally close the performance gap between disadvantaged kids and English language learners and their peers, because we could finally fully fund what every study we've ever done said would be the cost of effective programs to close those gaps. We could close the funding gap for special education. There are many, many different options that you would have if you took that money and you put it into improving the public schools rather than into providing for private education for students already there.
And we've heard that 98% of public school students are attending a district that doesn't have the recommended number of school counselors on their campus. With $1 billion, I think we could hire roughly 12,000 counselors to serve students, roughly 12 counselors per district. $7 billion, we could hire 84,000 counselors to serve students, roughly 84 counselors per district. Does that sound roughly correct?
It sounds approximately correct. I'm reminded a little bit of a Ben Sargent cartoon from many years ago, back in the 1970s when Dolph Briscoe was governor, and I was actually working for Dolph Briscoe as an advisor to him on school finance. And it shows him giving a commencement address to a bunch of cap and gown students, and he says, "And as I look out on your bright and eager young faces, I think to myself, damn, there goes another 10 yards of good freeway." That's the opportunity loss.
So Another thing we've heard a lot about is Texas teachers spending roughly $1,400 every school year on school supplies out of their own pocket. Is it, based on my calculations, we could wipe out those out-of-pocket expenses for every Texas school teacher with just half of what this voucher program would be in the first year, so only about $500 million.
It is frequently said that a budget is a moral document. It shows you what your priorities are. So the question is, before this legislature, what are your priorities in terms of where we ought to be putting our resources for funding kids? Should we put them to fund the 5 million plus kids who are already in our public school system that the Constitution says that we have a duty to provide for the suitable support and maintenance of an efficient system of public free schools? Or should we create a new program to create another slice of the pie in a pie that may or may not be big enough to pay for all of the cost of that slice?
And just last one, I know because we got to move on, but I've agreed with everyone here that we need more choice in our public school system. We need
Absolutely.
more options. One size doesn't fit all. We currently have magnets, academies, career and technical schools, charter schools that have long wait lists. My calculation is with $1 billion, we could open more of these magnets, more of these academies, more of these career and technical schools, and we could start to wipe away that long wait list. So I think the only point I'm trying to make is there is a cost benefit to creating the largest voucher program in the country, and the cost will be borne by the students that are in our public schools, and the benefit will go to students who aren't in the public schools.
Well, let me give you one other example of cost. There's a tremendous amount of administrative cost for this new program. The administrative cost that would be in the comptroller's office, the administrative costs that we would pay to the different new organizations that would be in charge of dispensing the money. And one of the promises that were made when charter schools were first created and adopted in 1995 was that they were going to be the laboratories for learning, and that we would be able to try out all of these different choices in education in them. And then based on what we learned from what the charter schools would be doing that worked and that didn't work, we would provide feedback to the public schools so public schools could expand their choices by adopting the various programs that work and by not doing the things that experiment had showed didn't work. You could take the administrative money that you're spending in this bill and use that instead to have TEA do the job that you in essence said that they were supposed to do in 1995 when the charter schools were created, and do the studies of what is going on in the charter schools, what are the good things that work that could be disseminated to the school districts around the state so that there would in fact be more true, open public school choice for the students in the state.
Thank you, Mr. Colbert. And lastly, just wanted to congratulate Josie on your testimony. You did great. Representative Kerwin, you have a lot to be proud of in your district, and Joshua Christian Academy has had some excellent students testify today. So just want to thank you for that.
You should be proud.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Members, more questions? Representative Hinojosa.
Mr. Colbert, I'm sorry I heard I didn't get the first part of your testimony. I had to take a break, but I wanted to thank my colleagues for holding you for me so I could ask you my many questions. Actually, I have one. I read the appropriations for this bill as a blank check for this reason. In the appropriation for this bill, and it's Rider 78, it mentions the $1 billion that is spelled out in the bill and in appropriations. And then it says, at the end, the last sentence, an amount to be determined by the Legislative Budget Board shall be transferred to the Comptroller of Public Accounts fiscal programs to implement the provisions of this legislation. Do you read that as a blank check like I do? Because the way I see it, the LBB can determine amount to transfer. That money would come from TEA budget. Kids leave public schools, there's more money, send it to the ESA program. Freed up GR, more GR to vouchers. Property values go up, frees up more money. LBB can send it to vouchers to this ESA. Is that how you read it?
Well, actually, I don't think the rider has much meaning in that regard at all, because as long as you don't have the provision that was in House Bill 1 from the fourth called session last session that Representative Bryant mentioned earlier, the Budget Board already has the ability through Budget Execution Authority to transfer as much money as they want to into the program. So it's a blank check unless you restore the safeguard, the guardrail that was in the legislation that was before you last session. And by the way, 1%, for every 1% of kids who leave a public school that go into a private school would cost the state about $1 billion a biennium for public, of lost revenue for public schools, since you were asking that before.
Representative Legal Wilson.
Have you seen the defund our schools for each district, like how much money they would lose? Have you looked at that at all?
I have not seen that, no.
Okay.
And-
I'm just wondering, like, well, since you haven't seen, you wouldn't know, but I'm wondering how they figured that out in counties that don't have an accredited private school option.
Well, first of all, you could lose a student in a county that doesn't have that accredited private school option if instead they went to homeschool and took the homeschool $2,000. So that would be one way that you could lose that money. And it's possible, I haven't seen it, but it's possible, just given Representative Hinojosa's question, that might be based on how much would you lose if 1% of your kids went to private education. I don't know if that's how that was calculated.
But you testified that you believe that most of it will be kids that are already not enrolled in public school, that they are already would be in private school.
Absolutely. And I think that's been the experience, and you've heard a lot of testimony on that today. That has been the experience in virtually every state that has done an expanded voucher program. Not when they had the initial programs like in Milwaukee with the limitations, but once they opened the doors to everyone in the manner that this bill would, on average, it's been 75% or somewhat over 75% of all of the kids who have actually received the vouchers or the ESA or whatever it is in the different states have been people who are already in private school, and therefore that's a cost to the state, even if not a single kid leaves a public school to go to private education.
Have you looked at any of the Ed Choice data that said that when initially ESAs were started in other states, that they came in and, a large percentage was kids in kindergarten?
Okay, so well, first of all, the kids in kindergarten, how
That were
many of
not
those were
enrolled.
the kids in kindergarten who were going to be going to kindergarten in a private school? They make no delineation with respect to that. And if you take a look at again, the way the fiscal notes were written last session, there was an assumption as to the number of kids that would go in based on that, because that was the only way that initially you could get into the funding for the program.
Oh, okay, I'm just trying to, reconcile that, the majority of kids are already currently not enrolled in public schools, but then the public school is going to lose all these kids, and that's going to cost all this money.
I have repeatedly contended that the threat to the future funding of public education is not so much the loss from public school students transferring into private education. It is I think as Representative Talarico has called it, the opportunity lost of what will not be available to you in future biennia to be able to fund public education. And as somebody who had to sit there and make painful budget cuts all throughout the budget in 1985, 1986, and 1987, you don't want to paint yourself into that corner.
Thank you.